The wedge theory is like, for those of us that are not black or indigenous on one end, like, consider it a spectrum. White on one side, black indigenous on the other. But where do Latinos and Asians fall, right? And the Latinos and Asians, it's two different things. Like Latinos, there's a proximity to blackness because of the having like the same socioeconomic background in the U.S., right? Because they are a lot of Latinos in this country are migrants or originally, and so the idea is because of their proximity to blackness, they're like white folks see their proximity to blackness, and so they're treated the same or similarly to those who are black. Whereas Asian folks were brought in very differently to this country. And because we came in, minus those that came very early on, we came into this country later, post 1965. And so because we came in post 1965, only the professionals came. And so we already had heard about America. I say we as an Asian, like we heard about America, and we learned that to survive in this country, we needed to align ourselves with whiteness and not blackness because we didn't want to catch that smoke, essentially. So we aligned ourselves with whiteness. And so proximity to whiteness keeps us, quote unquote, safer. But in doing that, they can be like, model minority. If the Asians can do it, why can't you do it? And so we created a wedge as people of color against other people of color.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a whole thing. And then like the riots in LA, the wedge theory came in crazy because professionals from Asia came, but they're not allowed to be doctors here. But they can get a loan because they're proximity to whiteness. But they can only get a loan in black neighborhoods.
Right.
Where black people couldn't get loans.
Right.
And so there's that automatic tension. Mm-hmm. Like, and that's why when everything blew up in LA, that tension was going because you created this sort of wedge between people of color when it's based on proximity to whiteness versus blackness, and that proximity to blackness being unsafe because the ruling sort of idea here is white supremacy.
Right.
So it's this whole thing, and yeah.
Yeah, it's the classic divide and conquer.
Yeah.
That's been used.
It's divide and conquer. And the problem is, even people who are a part of that, Asian folks will be like, well, we did it. Like, it becomes we are the model minority. Mm-hmm. And then you have to be like, we're not the model minority. We are just you're doing what you need to survive, and it's working, but to the detriment of other people. Right. And then that's the problem. Mm-hmm. No one wants to see that. So, yeah.
Florida or something, the way they wanted to acknowledge Asian history, but while removing black history.
Yeah.
And you see that here with the federal level with the anti-Semitism they're fighting, because Jewish folks are sometimes considered minorities or oppressed folks too. Mm-hmm. So the federal government is doing fighting a lot of anti-Semitism in their mind, targeting universities that have protests. And they're saying that's how they're combating discrimination.
Right.
You know?
And somehow they blame all of this on critical race theory, which is just saying, we don't like our history, let's do better.
It's just looking at it in a truthful way.
Yeah. When we talk about critical race theory and the war on information, that while it is scary and while it is sort of a shock that that in the year 2025, we're having this discussion again, or we continue to have this discussion, it's good to know that there are people who are fighting it, and that there are people whose memories are what is going to keep this fight going.
Exactly.
And I think that is actually something that, people can join in on. Let's learn our history, and let's at least keep it in our memory so that it could be, if we can't be taught formally in schools for now, let's at least have those conversations amongst ourselves.
Exactly. And this isn't new, and it reminds me of some James Baldwin quotes, which actually I need to find them on my phone really quick, but I want to pull up these James Baldwin quotes, because he would often talk about this as actually being one of the big issues with America, is like white people's inability to confront the truth. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Ooh, okay. I like that.
Baldwin.
I like that. Oh, yeah.
Fire, man.
Yeah.
So I want to wrap up with some quotes from James Baldwin, who talked about this 70 years ago and talked about the inability of America to face its history as being one of the central conflicts in this country. So in one of his books called No Name in the Street, he says, quote, "People who imagine that history flatters them, as it does since they wrote it, are impelled on their history like a butterfly on a pen and become incapable of seeing and changing themselves or the world. And another quote from The Fire Next Time, where he says, quote, white people are still trapped in a history which they do not understand, and until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. And one more from our great James Baldwin, where he says, to accept one's past, one's history, is not the same as drowning in it. It is learning from it and how to use it. So it's difficult to address history, to face the facts sometimes, but if you don't do it, it's like you're trapped in a reality of this greatness, that this myth of this country that you see many people are trapped in today.
Right. And, you know, the quote said it, you're not going to be able to change the world if you can't even change yourself.
Right.
So that are definitely some words to live by.
Welcome back to Breakdown Friday. Joseph Ward, Patrick Irvin, Professor Carl Tone Jones. We are here to go in on this wedge theory. Two parts, though. Two parts to this conversation we're having today. First, we're going to really get into this wedge theory, wrap our minds around this wedge theory and what it is and how it has been used. But also, not just how it's been used, but how people were willing to be used. Other groups, other non-white groups were willing to be used and willing to benefit themselves at the cost of others to come back and then say, hey, well, we should all get along, but you took the handouts at the detriment of others for your own group survival. So we are going to be talking about group survival and the choices that a lot of these other non-black groups who are also non-white made, these other groups of color. But also second half moving into what they were talking about, critical race theory also being used as a wedge between the races, but the idea of white people not being able to confront their truth, and white people don't understand their history, and white people don't realize the change that they need to make, because I kind of disagree with James Baldwin on that, and we're gonna expand on that. So PC, man, let's start with you, my brother. And I want to start with you because of the environment that you grew up in versus the environment that I grew up in. Philly is a bit more racially diverse. Well, is it? How racially diverse is Philly? Because Tallahassee is pretty much a black and white city.
Oh, well, racially is black and white.
Okay.
Now, ethnic, if you're talking about the ethnic components, then you can throw in Latinos, you can throw in the Jews, you can throw in the Italians, the Irish, the Russians.
Okay.
So and then you can throw in the non-American blacks, you can throw in the Jamaicans.
Okay.
Really don't have a big Haitian population here.
So more ethnically diverse.
Right, but it's growing. And then the African countries that
Got it.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So it's not in terms of if you want to use the term foundational American black, it's not that as much. We have a lot of that, but there's also diversity within the black community of Philadelphia.
Okay.
So and trust me, all those things are played against each other. You have the the gang wars that took place between the young brothers, the Liberian community in West Philly versus those who would now probably identify as ADOS or FBA, black folk down there in West Philly. You had that going on for a while. We've had the issues with and I'm talking about just within the community. Now, when you talk about others, there are like the Asian community. There's a nice, decent sized Asian community here. We have Chinatown, we have Koreatown, we have so, and then there's pockets of the city that are Cambodian. So Cambodian, Filipino there's different pockets of the city that operate like that. Not really big Japanese sort of thing, but
right. Okay.
So we do have all those, those different pockets in terms of the different groups, race wise and ethnicity wise. We do have those.
Gotcha. Because I believe the last time I looked, Tallahassee was like 50-something% white, 30% something black, a growing Hispanic population, and the rest is everybody else. But Tallahassee has always been predominantly black and white. And so it hasn't been enough of the other groups for this particular wedge theory in this city to really take hold. But starting with you, because growing up in more of an ethnic diverse place, how did you, well, first of all, what do you think about this wedge theory, and how did you notice, or did you notice this wedge theory, or even now, how do you see the wedge theory playing out as far as the divide and conquer aspect of it?
I think any group that comes to America makes a partnership, or they agree to a partnership to team up with the dominant class here. And in doing so is always, at a cost to us. And, in terms of people who identify as being, natively from this country. So you about to roll with another question.
No. What? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Because it just because I'm glad you said it like that, because it's saying the Asian girl. I'm hearing what she's saying, but it's kind of, in my opinion, kind of disingenuous, because you're not acknowledging the groups thinking about themselves and being willing to step on us. Like, you're not including that. Like, you skim over it, but you're not really hammering that home. Like, they were willing to step on us to enrich themselves.
Okay, so let me say it like this. In the Black community, we currently have a very divided community between the men and the women, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of the division comes from the concepts of the women being given government aid and assistance, corporate aid and assistance at the behest of the men, right? Mm-hmm. And so the same way we have to call that out and deal with the accountability for that division, then you pretty much have to also call other nations out for their culpability, their acceptance of these things, because everybody understands when they're operating in good faith. And then you also understand when you're given privilege over somebody else or another group, and that group is going to be minimalized, or that group is going to be harmed based on the actions that you take. And if you continue to agree to deal with it, typically most people tend to keep moving forward in that particular dynamic when they don't think there's ever going to be pushback or there's ever going to be a recourse for their actions. It's only after they've been burned by that other class, that dominant class themselves, and they start falling back on, well, we should have done this and we were tricked and we were bamboozled. No. You went along with the program, but you didn't realize, you didn't have enough foresight to understand that eventually you yourself would fall in that pecking order of the program. So I think everybody teams up with Team White Supremacy when it comes to like she said, you're getting business loans in Black communities. Well, morally speaking, what you're doing. And I talked about it before, I think maybe the last episode, the tax treaty laws, where it allows for, because of acts like the Homestead Act and things of that nature, it allows for other groups to come to this country and come not only with a clean slate, but also be given financial incentives, land grant incentives to come here. And so places that have liens, those tax liens are abated. And then the people that are coming and putting those businesses in there, they're getting startup money, and they get startup loans, and they get abatements themselves for at least a decade in many cases, for which they themselves don't have to pay any taxes on any profits that they make in those particular programs. So, it's really, like you said, it's disingenuous at best, because now it's like everybody realizes the one thing that the Latin community just realized. You really need Black people to stand tall with you, because Black people are the only people in this country that can't be evicted. We're the only people in this country that they can't say, hey, we're going to send you home somewhere and we're going to have ICE line you up or round you up. So now all these other groups are saying, hey, black people, stick your neck out on the line for us because you're the only ones that really can, be that. And we've seen how effective that your small population has had on changing the culture and through civil rights, through the Black Power movement, and through all the other suffrage movements that black people have engaged in. And we did that not just for here, but it spread as an example across the world. So when people see the strength, the intestinal strength, they see more strength in us than we do, by the way.
Yeah.
But when people see our intestinal strength, they want a piece of that and they want to partner back up to this. So this is what, my man AC, accountability commentary always calls the reach back. But this is nothing to do with the females reaching back to the men after discarding them for years. This is more so the other groups, whether it's an ethnic group or racial group, trying to reach back to black support after all these years, and then not fully being accountable for their part in the dirty deeds that were created against black people that they full-fledged partners in. Chinese and Asian folk, Chinese in particular, were very proud to announce that they were the model citizens, the model minorities here. They were very proud to talk about how they traded in their traditional clothing for, three-piece suits and shirts with a tie and moving and marching in the corporate world. They were very proud of that and being an example of that. And they were very proud as they were being paraded to the front. So now all of a sudden that the tide is starting to turn and you're starting to see the partnerships unravel. Now all of a sudden it's, more so along the lines of, well, hey, black folk, remember us? Yeah, hey, they bamboozled us. We were hoodwinked. Yeah. We were bamboozled. San Francisco rock fell on us.
Right.
So you have that, and then for her to even saying that the majority of the Chinese came here, the Asians came after 1965 is bullshit. Because then you go back into the history about the West Coast and Western expansion and all the things that Chinese talk about in terms of the expansion of the railroad and how they were then mistreated, how they worked alongside blacks, and how they themselves were then treated as second and third class citizens throughout that time. And they speak to the persecution they felt in terms of establishing communities here. You don't get to establish a Chinatown in every major city if you just got here in 1965.
Yeah. Well, to be fair to her, she because it's the way she said it, right? Because she glossed over the first wave of Chinese that came in like the mid 1800s.
Well, what she said was very few, and that's just not true. They came by the boatload.
I know, because and I know this because I visited the Oakland Museum, and there was a great migration of Asians, particularly Chinese, that came into California, particularly that Oakland, San Francisco area in like the mid 1800s.
But let's talk about that for a second, because one of the biggest reasons for that is because they wanted to establish all white colonies over there. So California, Oregon, Utah, and all those in Washington State, they wanted to establish those as all white colonies. So they did not want to import any, especially toward the end of slavery, when slavery, the Civil War was over, they didn't want to import any black folk into those towns. So that's because at that particular time, there was also colonization taking place in Asian countries, in Japan and Korea and China. There was also colonization efforts going on there. So a lot of those people were fleeing persecution from there coming to America as well during that time.
Right.
And then we got to consider the what was it? The Chinese Exclusion Act of, I think it was 1882, which, there was a whole act about keeping the yellow peril and the opium crisis and all of that other stuff that was happening in the late 1800s. I'm not the greatest at math, but I'm pretty sure the 1800s came before the 1900s.
They did.
So
I turned 18 before 19. So
I'm just saying, like, I understood what she was trying to say, but when she said that, I got lost for a minute.
But also, it's very disingenuous for the second half of it to use the James Baldwin's quotes to make a moral plea about to make a moral plea to talk about white supremacy, really realizing the bad things that they're doing on a moral level. What are you guys going to do the same thing?
Well, let's look at how Asians treat black people when they come. Let's look at we can go back to the pandemic when they were falsely accusing Africans of spreading the pandemic in Asia and China.
Asian hate crime bill.
They were stripping them of their passports. They were locking them out, not allowing them to go into restaurants, not allowing them to go into hotels. They were kicking them out. They were beating them up in the streets and things of that nature. And so, I mean, the whole concept around the Asian hate crime bill was based on the supposed relationship between blacks and Asians in this country, which was false because right before that you had massacres of Asians being unalived by white assailants, but no, they wouldn't want to focus on that. You had time after time, hundreds of videos of black women being assaulted in either nail salons, beauty salons, with acetone being thrown in their faces, beaten with brooms and mops in these stores over that particular time. So, even those things were drummed up in terms of the whole notion of the good nature or the good the goodwill faith or the good faith practices that Asians had towards blacks. So, I mean, this is what spits in the face of all of those. Well, we're going to blame it all on white folk. What can we blame on white folk right now that happens between Asians and blacks? When I've personally seen the treatment in these stores, and I've personally seen it, and I'm not saying all, of course, not all, but I'm saying I've seen it enough across the board where there's some issues there that speaks to years of disdain and malcontent when it comes to that relationship, and the majority of it typically doesn't come from black people because black people welcome every damn body into the hood.
That's what I'm saying, but it's like you can try to blame white people solely for this, but you still took the handouts, you still took the hands up, you still took the help at the detriment of another community. Even when you knew you would, even if you didn't know you were doing it in the beginning, you continued to do it, and they still continue to do it today.